Like, I don't want a house, but yeah.
No, it's not worth it.
So today we are doing Gothic Europe. Yeah. I did hit record, didn't I?
Yeah.
I think I did.
I think so.
Good God. Yeah, I did. Okay. Okay. Some regional variants. We're going to do this just like we did Romanesque style yesterday, where we went from region to region, just because there are differences from region to region with Gothic art as well. We're going to be focusing on France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire today, because on Monday we do Italy, and Italy has its own section, has its own chapter called Early Renaissance, which is happening at the same exact time as Gothic architecture. So yeah, we'll do that Monday. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, you guys work on your group stuff. Okay. Now, like I said, we are focusing on France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire. France looks a little like this-ish. England up here, and Holy Roman Empire is the German portion up here. Just to give you an idea of the region that we're looking at today. And like I said, every single one is going to have its own thing. And they're, like yesterday, it wasn't extraordinarily different between regions, as they all tended to incorporate the Roman arch, like stylistically. These guys, they're quite visually different. Gothic art itself happens in France first, and then spreads throughout. So the OG Gothic art is the French one. The term Gothic was coined by Vasari in 1550. It was a ridicule. Vasari, of course, an Italian art historian that came about in the Renaissance period, during the High Renaissance. And he's comparing what's happening to the High Renaissance to what came before. And he felt that Gothic architecture, well, really anything that came before the Renaissance after the fall of Rome, was just horrible. Are there some aspects that I would agree? Yes, there's some that I would disagree, though. I tend to agree with what other people think, which I said down here, that Gothic art is an opus modernum of the era. So really a culmination of all of the architectural movements that came beforehand to create a new, at the time, modern form of architecture. Gothic was almost ahead of its time, especially in comparison to what was happening during the Romanesque style. See, I told you, I had a growth of appreciation for Gothic architecture during this section, which is not bad. Maybe because I was tired of seeing Roman arches. But that term Gothic stuck. It was originally from, well, what the Romans and Greeks used to call French people, which were Goths, or the Visigoths. Who were known as barbarians. So it's really not a pleasant term to be associated with. If you look up Gothic today, of course, you get very different imagery. People wearing all black, white faces, black hair. That's what you get today. So very different. That is not what it used to be. So don't think that as we're going through today. It's a different kind of Gothic. That's a modern Gothic, not the original. But it did stick after other people like Ghiberti used that term in books to describe the decline in art. Like I said, it happens in France first and then spreads throughout. This is all due to widespread prosperity. These churches cost a ton of money to build, a ton. If it wasn't for widespread prosperity and people having the money to donate, these churches would not have been able to be built. Continuing on from yesterday we saw the formation of cities instead of feudal lands. Well, cities continue to expand during this era of architecture, and that expansion leads to the formation of guilds. We're going to talk more about guilds on Monday, like the Woolmakers Guild and the Silk Guild. Funny enough, people that did metal work, like artisans that worked with gold, they tended to be members of the silk guild because it was in the same trade family. And often the metal workers would spin gold into threads to be used on silk fabric. Pretty cool. Anyways, so guilds are formed. Universities are also formed to educate people. Woohoo! The first universities are in French. This is all happening first in France, by the way. It's called the Ile-de-France, where all of this is happening in that particular location. And then it spreads throughout and is adopted by the rest of Europe as well. And vernacular literature is being produced, meaning literature that people are reading. People are becoming literate. Yay! Amazing. But vernacular literature is a little bit different from like Bible. Vernacular literature is non-Bible stories. Most of these early ones are based around romantic court life stories. And we'll see some of that later on with my favorite art piece from the Gothic era. It really is. It's one of my favorites. It's so absurd. Like I mentioned, Paris is the epicenter of the Gothic style. And Gothic style is marked with, well, towards the beginning of the 13th century. It does continue on into the Renaissance era. And it's an aesthetically pleasing art style. So it lasts for a while. We are starting with French Gothic, the original Gothic. Starting off with Saint Denis. Saint Denis is the birthplace of Gothic architecture. The very first example of a Gothic church. If you're curious about the age, it's somewhere. Oh, it's 1140 to 1144. It's somewhere. I know I wrote it. I just did this the other day. I wrote all of the dates. Sometimes I didn't write it on every slide, but I did write it. They are still using stone masonry to create all of these churches. And this all happened because Suger needed a bigger church. So pilgrimages are still taking place and bigger churches are necessary to accommodate them. Most churches wanted to be able to accommodate the city population. So it needed to be a lot bigger. We still have our three-part church, which we talked about yesterday, starting at, well, the really tail end of the Romanesque era. We have 1, 2, 3. This is just an early example of that happening. It was done in stages from 1140 to 1144. Oftentimes what happens with most of these Gothic churches, and sometimes the Romanesque ones too, is they'll start taking up money for these churches and they'll build it section by section as they get money. If there's like a downturn in the economy, they have to stop working on it periodically. Or if there's a war, they have to stop. People are gone. So yeah. He used the original plans of the OG Saint Denis that already existed there and then added to it using Gothic style architecture with the east and west facades, as well as adding onto a choir and ambulatory. Originally, it was just your basic basilica plan. It's just adding to. So a cheap renovation in comparison to building a whole new church, which is what a lot of other people did. Some of the early characteristics of Gothic architecture are incorporated, however. We have our rose window and stained glass windows, which are quintessential to a Gothic church. The rose one is your round one. And of course, most Gothic churches will have an east and west facade. They will be different. Each one will have a theme surrounding it with a statuary. We'll look at some more specific ones later on. And of course, an ambulatory and radiating chapels to keep relics or icons. Inside, it does use ribbed vaulting, which we kind of looked at a little bit yesterday with the predecessor. And it is dedicated to Saint Dionysius, not Dionysus, Dionysius. He's a strange guy. Not going to talk about them because we got a lot of stuff we got to do today. This is the longer chapter. It's either good or bad. I don't know. It's been a good morning, honestly. I got to talk about the Italian Renaissance in my first class and now Gothic architecture in this one. It's a nice theme today. And my morning class kept asking me, why is Da Vinci so famous? There's a lot of reasons. I can't just give you a short answer, which is why we didn't finish today. And they always ask me about the value of art too. Like, why is it so expensive? There's a lot of reasons.
I don't know.
There's no set answer.
Create this piece.
And then they're like, why does Da Vinci's art cost so much? I'm like, well, why do certain movie stars make more money than others? That would be why. Oh, because they're more famous? Yeah, that's why. And you're like, well, why is Da Vinci so famous? He's in literally every textbook. Anyway, so it's just interesting conversations today. I don't mind having them, but they're different. We didn't really talk about art today. We talked about money. I don't mind that either. I know it's expected if it's math, they're famous, but they care about money. I did encourage them. I was like, you guys need to go in like art business or art law because they do make a lot of money and they deal with money. So they might like it. But here is our plan of Saint Denis. We added on all of these, the ambulatory and all of these radiating chapels along the side, a little bit different from the Romanesque ones. You'll see there's a lot more radiating chapels here. With Gothic art and architecture, it always seems like it's more than what came before. There's more to it. It's more extravagant, bolder, kind of weird. Art has that theme where it goes very plain to like kind of impressive to over the top, and then again and again and again, a cyclical effect. Here are our ribbed vaults. I am going to show you the difference in a second between a ribbed vault and a groin vault, as they are a bit different. Groin vaults have the round arch to them. Ribbed vaults have the pointed arch. Pointed arch is more stable structurally, so therefore ribbed vaults are a lot more stable. As you get the taller, leaner form, it's just more structurally sound than a circle. Circles are not structurally sound usually. You can see the original basilica format though here. And of course the facades that were added on east and west. Inside are, of course, the actual look of the ribbed vaults. I wanted you to see what they actually look like. Ribbed vaults are going to change and progress as we go, though. And I say change and progress. They're going to get pointier. That's what I mean. They're going to get pointier to allow for more height. Like I said at the beginning, this is the first example of Gothic architecture. Gothic architecture in France is all about verticality. So tall and lean, just early on. English Gothic architecture is not about height, so it's going to be different. Of course, you have your columns harkening back to ancient Rome. You can kind of see the stained glass windows that use Gothic pointed arches to knock those out as well. So there's a combination of some newer art trends, the pointed arch, with older Roman style trends of the column and the basic arch. It's just morphing here. Here are different vaults to really hit home the difference between your basic groin or barrel vault and your actual Gothic vault that uses the pointed arch versus the semicircular round arch. And you can see already here, these are actually the same exact height, but one of them looks visually taller than the other because the point comes up higher at the top, but these arches are the same height. So yeah, verticality. It is very much achieved thanks to the pointed arch. Now, our next Gothic cathedral is quite a bit different from Saint Denis. A lot more impressive. We're going to start off focusing on just one of the facades, though, as this church did burn down. So it was begun in the early Gothic ages. It originally had a wooden roof. No. And it did catch fire, and it was rebuilt again towards the middle of the Gothic era, and then added onto at the very end of the Gothic era during the flamboyant period, which you can see popping up on this spire right here. Yeah, there's different periods of Gothic architecture within Gothic architecture. There's actually about 3 or 4 of them. So, yeah, like I said, we're only starting off with the 1194 portion, and then we'll come back to Chartres Cathedral later. Because it's kind of the quintessential example of Gothic architecture. This is the star of the show here. Most people on my other classes, when I bring up Chartres, because it is called Notre Dame de Chartres, they think of Notre Dame de Paris. They're different. We are going to look at Notre Dame de Paris. There's a lot of churches dedicated to the Virgin Mary. That's all Notre Dame means. A church dedicated to Virgin Mary. There's a lot. We're going to look at a bunch. They are denoted by their town, though. And this one is in Chartres, France, which is only about 30 miles away from Paris. Yeah, I got to this thing where I stopped including pictures on each slide because there was so much information. And I wanted big pictures too, like full slide pictures to capture the grandioseness of the architecture. So I decided to do a slide with info and then pictures. So yeah, if you're wondering what's happening here. It is known for supposedly housing the mantle of the Virgin. That was in the original 1194 church. Miraculously, in the fire, though, there were a few things that did not burn. First off, the crypt. Second off, one of the facades, which is the one we're about to look at. And thirdly, the mantle of the Virgin. The only things that didn't burn. It's a miracle. It is. It truly is. Which did garner a lot more pilgrims to go to the region. They're like, oh my gosh, it didn't burn up. And like I mentioned, the crypt didn't burn. That'll be important later when we talk about it again. The facade that we are looking at is the west facade, the original facade from 1194. It has a royal portal on it. What that means is it is adorned with Old Testament kings and queens, statues of them, which is why it's called the royal portal. We talked about portals yesterday. Those are the doorways into the church. They have the tympanum, door jambs, all of those. We're going to be looking at that today. But for Chartres, the archivolts themselves depict imagery of the personifications of the arts, as well as humans that will really represent the quintessential arts of that time. And we're not talking about like music, painting. We're talking about philosophy and education. As Chartres is right nearby the university, and they definitely supported learning at Chartres, which is not the norm, but they did. The tympanum shows Christ in majesty, the usual Christ where he's got a mandalorian behind him and his arms are open. We've seen lots of those. This is another one. And on his right is the Virgin on a throne. The tone of the Virgin enthroned is going to be changing a little bit. We talked about before, the Virgin enthroned is really like she's a seat that Christ is sitting on. Throughout this era, the Virgin is going to shift into actually being a mother figure, which I think you can probably figure out considering a lot of the churches are dedicated to her. She's considered to be the ideal female figure. And on the left is the ascension into heaven. Now, what it actually looks like. So here we have Christ with the Mandalora. Surrounding him are images of the 4 evangelist gospel writers. And of course, Mary with Christ on her lap, the Virgin enthroned with two angels on each side. And the ascension into heaven here, he also has two angels on each side. So they kind of mimic each other in composition stylistic choices. On the archivolts, we have all of those personifications of the arts in human form. And all of these jams are different Old Testament royalty figures. So the royals of the Old Testament Bible. All of the jams. You're smiling. Why are you smiling? Okay, I'm glad you're happy. As stated, this is the original facade, meaning this is early Gothic sculptural relief. We're going to see it change throughout, which is why I decided to pull this one. I skipped a lot of the pictures in your book because there's a lot. This chapter is extremely long. I pulled some of them for you to grasp the idea of the shifting changes as it progresses through the time of Gothic period into Renaissance, as Gothic is a bit of a bridge. If you remember Archaic period for the Greeks, it was kind of the precursor to the classical period. That's how Gothic sculptural reliefs are for the Renaissance. They are the precursor. And we are slowly but surely going to see it progress as time goes on. There is a close-up of some of the kings and queens on the door jambs. They are very much adhered to the columns that they are stuck to. They are obviously not freestanding at all. We still have the repetitive pattern folds. They're in very rigid poses. There's not really any individualism to figure out who's who. In fact, there's so little individualism that during the French Revolution, these were vandalized. The revolutionaries thought these were supposed to represent kings and queens of their time. And if you're familiar with the French Revolution, they wanted to get rid of monarchy. So they destroyed, well, not really destroyed, but they vandalized and messed up these statues because they thought they were current day kings and queens. They didn't realize they were Old Testament. Therefore, really showcasing and hitting home the fact that these are not individualized figures and you can't figure out who they are. Once again, early Gothic. Really reminiscent of like the early Byzantine art too, with their rigidness and the patterning in their folds, sticking to that early Christian Byzantine style. Artists will try and experiment later on. I don't know what that is. Now, that takes us to another cathedral. Today is cathedral day. Everything's a cathedral. Sorry. If you don't like cathedrals, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. We're going to be looking at different cathedrals as we progress through the Gothic age to figure out what they're working with and the new stuff that they're trying. This is Leon Cathedral, not to be confused with Leon Cathedral that we talked about yesterday. Different one. Leon Cathedral is in Spain. This one's in France. But this one retains its Romanesque features. It does, however, include rib vaults with your pointed arches, which is characteristic of the Gothic era, and it adds in a triforium. So that's a new one, triforium. We're adding a new word. Triforium is a level located right below the clerestory, which you see here, and above the gallery. It's usually denoted with 3 windows or 4 windows, small windows. This, however, is just arches, it's not windows. Later on, they'll start doing windows. So we have our nave, aisles, gallery, triforium, and clerestory. We're adding levels here. We're adding vocab and levels. Yes. So now we have 4 levels instead of just 3. As I mentioned again and again, Gothic architecture is all about verticality. There's going to be more levels yet. And of course, this one also incorporates stained glass windows. but you probably don't need me to tell you that. You can see it. It is very small, so maybe you can't see it. And something that is important to note, you can kind of tell with this one, but sometimes we don't quite like connect it. All of these cathedrals are still being used today. I know, sometimes I don't like, yeah. Yeah. Mm. It's one of those things that I forget and people don't know sometimes because like I've been to a bunch of cathedrals, so now I'm like, oh, everyone knows that, but no, they don't. That's not common knowledge. But it is cool that they still use all of these. It's also, if you're a tourist like me, kind of sucky because you can't just go into them. You have to wait for like masses and things to be done. But yeah. Anyways, here is the facade of Leon Cathedral. And it shows off the incorporation of really deep porches. That's going to be common throughout Gothic architecture as well. Before we saw quite shallow porches, like the Royal Portal was a bit of a shallow one. This one, however, shows a deep porch. Normally, all of this barrel vault here would be covered with archivolts. That's going to happen later. This is an early example. We have our pointed arch, our rose windows, some more round semicircle arches, and two Gothic towers. These are bell towers. The towers of the bells are going to get taller as well. These are pretty to look at, though. They really are. All three of these doors work. They're all entrances. Of course, the main one is the double door. And it still has your jam figures, your tympanum, your lintel, your archivolts. All of it is sculpted. Now, this is a fun little picture just to show you how much things progress and what you're going to be seeing like actually rather than cartoon version today. We started off with, well, Saint Denis, which isn't here. Here's Chartres height. This is Chartres after it's been rebuilt though. The one we just looked at, Leon, with its 4 levels is right here. Following that chronologically would be Notre Dame de Paris, right here. Following that chronologically would be the second Chartres. And then following that is Amiens. You're going to see all of these today. You can see here the height differences and what's going to be happening. And Amiens technically holds the crown for the tallest. There was another cathedral that was designed to be taller, but it was never completed. So we aren't going to look at that one. But yeah, there's one that was supposed to be taller than that. And Amiens is extremely impressive. Haven't been. But yeah. I have been to quite a few of the places that we're talking about today, but not any of these. Sorry. You might have gone to the Paris one.
We didn't go inside.
Oh,
We
yeah.
saw the exterior. We haven't been to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably tried to.
Yeah.
Or at least just
I don't know.
around.
None of the French ones I've been inside. I've been in one of the English ones that we're talking about today, and I've been in one of the German ones that we're talking about today. But none of the French ones. Next is Notre Dame de Paris from 1130. This was created, well, not technically 1130, but it starts around 1130 when Louis VI moves his court to Paris. This ends up causing a really large building boom as a new city is being built there. And it requires them to, of course, build a church, which is Notre Dame. Notre Dame was done in different time periods and stages. As I mentioned, they start and stop things with these churches. The transept and choir was done in 1182, the nave 1225, and the facade 1260. That's going to be normal. I got tired of writing the dates as I went through because everything has a different date. But it does show you how long it takes them to build these things. It's a long process. It is comprised of pointed arches, rib vaults, a triforium with those 3 windows that we just saw lay on, an oculus. We'll look at what an oculus is in a second. It's not the same oculus as the Pantheon, but it's a round window. So same function, just different location. And a lot of other stuff, which we'll cover when we look at the picture. It has everything. It doesn't have everything, but it has a lot. By the way, at the end of this, I'm going to ask you guys which location was your favorite. So do you like the French Gothic, the Holy Roman Empire Gothic, or the English Gothic the best? I have a preference. I'm not going to tell you my preference. So yeah, I will at the end, but not right now. So keep that in mind as we go forward to figure out which one you like the most. Here is a cartoon version of the interior of Notre Dame so that I can have a diagram because, like I said, there's a lot. So we have our pinnacles, which are the lovely little side towers. Those were added towards the end of the building of Notre Dame. You have your flying buttresses over here and here that help support the exterior walls of the church. They really do function as well an external skeleton for the entire church building. And then you have your vault webbing. So here are your ribbed vaults at the top. They included in Notre Dame de Paris some webbing in between those vaults. It's a very thin layer of stone that just look visually stunning and appealing versus the blocky textures that we had before. It looks like a web, which is why it's called webbing. Your diagonal ribbing, which is right here. It's the rib in between the rib. And your transverse rib, you don't need to know that, so you don't have to worry about it. Springing, which are these guys here. Your clerestory, which is, of course, the windows right up here. Your triforium, which this one is just double windows. The new one for you guys, though, is your oculus window, which is the round window at the top. Yeah. There's a lot. It really is. Yeah. The exterior of the facade obviously has 3 portal entrances. Each one has a recessed portal. It is a little bit further back than the first portal that we looked at today. Your rose window above, and then of course your Gothic pointed arches echo in and mixing in on the next level above. You have sculptures of royal Old Testament figures right here. And of course your windows at the top of the bell towers. Interior view, you have your arches, your webbing in between, your rose window on the inside, as well as the lancet windows below hand, your oculus window right here with your clerestory, and then you have your gallery row here with some lancet windows behind it, and of course, well, your nave and transepts and aisles. Yeah, this is just repeating vocabulary at this point. We add a new vocab word on every single church, pretty much. That's how it goes. As I mentioned, flying buttresses were introduced. This is the first church to really use the final form of flying buttresses, and then other Gothic churches are going to follow suit. This one was not originally designed with flying buttresses, but as they started progressing, they realized they needed some sort of a structural support to hold up all of the stained glass windows, walls. So they decided to use flying buttresses, or invent them, or really coin them, to counteract that outward thrust. So the walls themselves, full of stained glass, can't support themselves, and they kind of just want to fall out. The flying buttresses keep them from falling out by positioning them there. Like I said, it's an external skeletal system for the church. As I mentioned, this church was not originally planned with flying buttresses. They realized they needed it. Other churches following after this are going to realize how important they're going to be, and they figure out that they are kind of aesthetically pleasing to look at too, and make it really unique. So they will purposefully incorporate them. Don't you want to click forward? There we go. Now, second Chartreuse. After 1194. So in 1194, the church burns down. It takes 27 years to rebuild the church, which is actually really short in comparison to the other churches that we've looked at. But the people of Chartres got so mad. They got so mad that they chased the bishop out of town for 4 years. They wouldn't let him come back for 4 years. They threatened his life. They're like, stop asking us for money, dude. Stop. Chased him out with pitchforks and torches. 4 years he wasn't allowed back. So there was a stall in there for 4 years as nothing happened. But yeah, 27 years is actually really short for all of these churches. The new Chartres Cathedral was done in the High Gothic style. So no more early Gothic, we have High Gothic. And we are going to look at the High Gothic portion now. We looked at the early Gothic already. So it kind of makes Chartres a more unique example of Gothic, as you can compare it like literally right there instead of looking at two separate churches. It's both there. And like I mentioned, the flamboyant style as well. That's fun. Later on, one of these towers, this one right here, is going to burn down again, but only the tower was lost. It was rebuilt in the late Gothic style, which is the flamboyant style, which is why it's so different. Flamboyant style is known for, well, being extra. It's for other reasons, but it's extra, which is why this one's a little bit more gaudy than the other one. I don't think of gaudy as a bad thing, though. So, I know that gets negative connotations, but I don't always think so. Now, interior format, we have the narthex west portal that we already looked at, the royal portal. And then they added 2 other porches on each side. This is the porch of the martyrs. We're going to take a closer look at that later. Guess what? It's adorned with martyrs. That's why it's called that. Then you have your other porch opposite to create that lovely cross format. You have your ambulatory, choir, and side chapels. Your nave, your aisles. And you might notice that they are using rectangles here. There's going to be another church that we look at in a second that uses rectangles instead of squares. All of the other churches that we've looked at use squares. So we're using a different architectural shape. I know that that makes no sense to you right now, but square is a bit squat, rectangle is a little bit longer, and you can make it pointier and higher. No, it's not funny. I can't figure it. This took me a long time because I was reading it. I can't figure out things when I'm reading it. Luckily, your book has pictures. Yeah. Rectangles allow for higher points in the arches, allowing for even more height, which is why Chartres is a lot taller than the others are. So as I mentioned, it has rectangular sections instead of squares. This does also allow not only for more height, but a sexpartite arch. It just means that it's got more division. So more than just 4 with the ribs. It's got more ribs on it. This allows the vaults to be even pointier, and the pointier your vaults are, the more stable they are, and of course, the more vertically inclined as well. It has flying buttresses. The flying buttresses on this one were intended from the beginning. It has a rose window. It actually has a lot of rose windows on this church. There's 3. So. A triforium, thanks to Leon, a clerestory, and double lancet windows, as well as an oculus window. So it's really incorporating all of the new stuff from the previous churches that we've already talked about into one. And we still have another French church to talk about yet. So guess what? There's going to be more. They just keep adding. But it really does progress quite aesthetically well. It becomes even more pleasing to look at as you go on, versus early Gothic, which was a bit squat and plain, very Romanesque. It's really impressive. Here's the interior of Chartres. I chose the portion that has been cleaned. So Gothic churches get this bad rap that they're really dark inside. They were not originally intended to be dark. It's just candlelight and soot. Remember, these guys didn't have electricity. So all of their light was from torches and candles, which does create a buildup on walls and ceilings to give them that black appearance. That's not the way they're supposed to be. Most of them do have this really light, bright stonework. Sometimes they do incorporate marble, such as this. Sometimes they use white marble to coat the surfaces to really reflect the light of the sunlight coming in through the stained glass windows, of which there are a lot in Chartres. So here you have your oculus window at the top, your double lancet window right below it. This really echoes the original plan of a major rose window. It's just copying that in a smaller format. And then below that, you have your triforium. And of course, your aisles and your nave is where we're standing right now here from this viewpoint of the picture. We are going to now look at some of the stained glass windows in Chartres. This is pretty much the only window that's original from before the fire. It's considered to be a holy window because it didn't get destroyed in the fire. This is the Virgin and Child and Angels detail from one of the side panel areas in the church. Stained glass windows become really popular because of the notion of lux nova, or really holy light. They felt like the light that came in through the stained glass windows was representative of the holy light of heaven, filling the space. God himself in most of the Bible is represented as the way, the truth, and the light. So therefore it would make sense that they would want to have a lot of light. Not basic light though, stained glass window light. Which my first hour, like none of them had ever been in a church with stained glass windows. And I'm like, I know there's churches around here that have stained glass windows, fam. Go. Even I have been in a church with stained glass windows. It's different. It's a different kind of light. It's really gorgeous to bask in. Have you guys seen a church with stained glass windows? Yeah. I'm like, I knew there's got to be a church because I'm like, Monaghan, almost all the churches have stained glass windows there. It's pretty common. Yeah. Yep. So if you haven't been, go look at the stained glass windows from the inside as the light's coming in on a morning or something. There's a difference between regular windows and stained glass that I can't really describe. I can't think of anything. Maybe you guys can. It's special. Yeah. And that's the feeling of like all of this. It's a special magical feeling to see all of these colors raining down on you in a space. Of course, this is just your basic image of Christ sitting on his mom's lap. Now, more impressive image of the stained glass at Chartres. This is the rose window that was done in 1220, so after the fire. It is 43 feet in diameter, so huge. The central rose window, well, in the very center, it has Christ on Mary's lap once again, and it is surrounded by, well, doves and images of, well, their family tree. This particular scene, as well as the scenes below, all have members of Christ's family. It's called Jacob's tree. Not Jacob's, Joseph's tree. I forgot his dad's name. That's bad. Joseph's tree, which is listed in the Bible. If you've ever checked that out, it lists his entire chronology of family history. It does. I've had to read it before. One of the New Testament books has it, like before the Annunciation. I can't remember which one, but I remember reading it because I had a pastor once who was very interested in going through the family history. Yeah. It mentions like David and some of the other really famous ones, as well as the minor ones. It even mentions some of the women. So it's kind of cool. You can look that up later. I remember reading it. I was probably like 10, so I can't remember which one. If I'm remembering correctly, when we went to that particular church, I was about 10. Below this rose window are fleur-de-lis and yellow castles, referencing, of course, the crown and royalty of France. I'm so glad I remember these things sometimes. I don't know how I get proud of myself sometimes. I remember stuff. And of course, once again, some more imagery of his family tree of the particular members. In the center is another image of Mary with Christ. And once again, these guys below are your lancet windows. Lancet windows are thin, long windows with a pointed arch at the top. Sometimes they're a little bit thicker. They don't always occur underneath the rose window. Like if you remember back to this one, these guys are lancet windows as well. They have the same shape, different location. This one's a fun one. It's not the only rose window we're going to look at. The only one that's in your book, but I pulled a different one because I like it. Here's some of the sculptures on the outside of the redone portals. This is St. Theodore's jam statue from the left portal, the Porch of Martyrs. St. Theodore is a martyr, which is why he is located on the Porch of Martyrs. Martyrs are people that die for their beliefs. Not just Christians, there's pretty much every religion has martyrs. He is standing contrapposto, which is why I pulled him. As I mentioned, Gothic art era is kind of your in-between as we transition into Renaissance period. So Renaissance is known for a rebirth of classical ideas and beliefs. We're seeing that starting here as they're bringing back contrapposto. Now, yes, he has contrapposto, but it is not a accurate contrapposto as his knees and ankles are still very even. But he's got a curve to him. So good job, Theodore. So it does show that transition just like the archaic art period did. We do see the detail of his chainmail, which I really appreciate. I think that's so cool that they were able to achieve the detail on that. Mm-hmm. He has a halo behind him. He is attached to the back column, but he's not nearly as attached as the first door jambs that we looked at. He's not stiff either. He has an individual characteristic style to him. Like, oh, this is Theodore. Okay, awesome. I could probably pick him out if I knew my saints. I wouldn't be able to pick him out. I don't know my saints. To be honest. But he's not nearly as identical as the kings and queens from the royal portal were. And that takes us to Amiens, the tall one. The tall one. Amiens does have architects. Their names are listed here. There's 3 of them. And this is the west facade. It obviously has a very deep porch with decorated archivolts, and everything else is decorated to the nines. It is lit up with electricity now, which makes this picture really gorgeous. This is a picture that I found online and I really liked it because it made it look really pretty. Your book didn't look like this. Actually, I don't even think your book showed the outside. It does. I don't remember having it. Rose window. This is a different kind of rose window. Rose windows do become a lot more complex. This is your basic plate window. This is a tracery window. Tracery is known for being a little bit like a doily effect, where it has all of the intricate finials in between. Why do I know that? I don't know. That's not in your book. It is pretty. Really gorgeous, gorgeous church. Once again, you have your royal portrait statues up here. Your we'll talk about this. Not today. I'm not going to talk about this one today. Not today. Because it's going to come up on Monday a lot. It's a trefoil. I like trefoil. I used to draw them everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like a 4-leaf clover. That's a trefoil. Finished around 1270, High Gothic era. It's much more slender than Chartres, but it was made after Chartres. This is kind of a continuation. If you remember when we talked about Hagia Sophia, all of the churches that followed that wanted to outdo it. Same thing with Gothic. All of the churches are trying to outdo each other, become more ornate, more tall, more slender. And Amiens does accomplish that. I mean, it's the tallest one, so it wins. It does show off the confidence of the architects. They are extremely familiar with Gothic architecture at this point, and they are confident in their usage of the elements, particularly fine buttresses, pointed arches, all of the windows. They know how to do it. But most likely they've been studying under all of the other guys beforehand, which we don't know the names of the others, which is why I didn't mention them. It does have very complex vaulting. We'll look at it. It does use rectangular bays like Chartres did, instead of the square ones, rectangular, longer, taller, thinner. It does have flying buttresses, just like Paris and Chartres or Chartres. The ceiling is 140 feet tall. And if you're wanting to know the exact heights of the others, Leon, the early one that we looked at, was 80 feet. Paris is 115, Chartres is 120. So it's a bit taller, quite a bit, actually. And adding to the illusion of height is the fact that the architects designed all of the lines to converge onto the thin colonnettes. And the lines and the constant line helps give the illusion of height. All of the others that we've looked at, the lines are not lined up perfectly. There's like a line here, a line here, a line here. There'd be like 2 columns and a line in between, which is cool too. If you like staggering, it would be staggered. That's what you would call it. This one is continuous. This is the one I would want to go see if I could. Because you can't really imagine 140 feet tall high ceilings unless you're there.
It'd be insane.
It'd be insane, yeah. My art history professor used to every other year take a trip to Paris with students. It was expensive. I didn't go. It's like $5,000, $6,000 for the trip. By the way, there is a trip to Spain coming up next year in case you're interested. It is $5,000, but it's a week. And it pays for entrance into all of the museums and the hotel and breakfast and dinner. You're in charge of lunch and souvenirs. I can pull up that email if you're interested. You can stick around and yeah, I'll pull that up. Got rid of it because I was like, I can't afford that. Yeah. Not with a house that I'm planning on getting. But yeah, it should be a fun trip. Here is the inside of Amiens. Like I said, very complex vaulting. It does use the rectangles, but still, this is a lot of ribbing, which adds to how high you can get things. They're extremely pointed. There is webbing in between. You can see the webbing here and here. You have, of course, your very tall arches. And here's where you can see how I mentioned all of the lines converge on the columns. All of that linearity helps add to that idea of, oh, this is really tall. A continuous line rather than a disjointed line appears a lot taller. And I included the floor. Your book doesn't talk about it. I think that's a really interesting tile pattern on the floor. And this is marble. That's a marble floor. Another church that's still being used as well. To go to church service here, I wouldn't pay attention to anything that the dude said. I'd be just I know. I would not be looking at anything besides up and around. Of course, you still have all of the other things that we've looked at before. This one does not have a gallery. It has your triforium, your oculus window, some lancets, and another oculus rather than a gallery.
The choir would sound so beautiful.
Yeah.
In there.
Yeah.
Just the noise.
Those boundaries depend on
Yeah, I would probably go with that.
I would
Yeah.
love to know what.
Oh, here's a fun thing. So over to the side, you see this golden thingy?
Yeah,
That's where the dude preaches from. It's a pulpit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have a-
Most traditional European churches will have a pulpit for the guy to preach from, and it would be up above. In the front here is an altarpiece. Usually it has some sort of scene of the resurrection or crucifixion or lamentation, really to encourage you to, well, renew and restore your faith and give money.
they would have
That was the original purpose. Nowadays it's not, but
They have like all the candles up there.
yeah.
Mhm.
I pulled a picture of the choir vault just to give you an idea of how impressive it is. It looks like a giant canopy overarching the choir with the vaulting. This one does have more of a barrel vault feel towards the choir end rather than like your ribbed vault or pointed arch vault. It is still a pointed arch vault. It just doesn't feel like it. And of course, all of the windows help add in all of that light too. Its clear story, which is what this is, harkens back to Hagia Sophia's to make the roof feel like it's floating as the light pours in. Really cool. So cool. I feel sorry. If you don't like Gothic art, you're probably wondering why we're losing our minds. I'm sorry. Now we're going to look at some of the Amiens statuary. Actually, I just pulled this one because I thought it was more interesting than the others were. Some of them. Because it has the introduction of a canopy. This is going to be pretty popular in early Renaissance to include canopies over top of your sculptures. This canopy is the same design as Amiens Church. It's like a miniature Amiens over top of Christ. So this is the Christ Trumius statue. It's just Christ being welcoming and, well, blessing you. He's giving a symbol of blessing while holding the Bible. Once again, a realistic, individualized person. If you stared at this long enough and I said it was Christian, you'd probably guess it's Christ, unless your brain is full of saints. Maybe not. He is still attached to the column behind him, but once again, he looks quite a bit more free. He is standing on top of a lion and a dragon too, to like crush out evil. Yeah. So this one's interesting to me. Like I said, that canopy is going to be a common trend from this point on for sculpture. His drapery looks a lot more realistic too than some of the others that we've talked about. So we are slowly progressing into what the Renaissance artists will be doing. It takes us to Reims Cathedral. Yeah, Reims is quite a bit different. It has technically. There's many porches on this one. The porches are much more exaggerated and rounder rather than pointier. This takes us into a transition into what will be known as the flamboyant style, which is a bit over the top and dramatic. We aren't quite there, but we are seeing now with this one, they mastered Gothic art and now they're trying to just figure out how to add to it and make it, well, individualized from church to church. So once again, we do have specific architects. This is the western facade of Reims Cathedral. It incorporates the King's Gallery statuary up here, which we've already seen a lot of them. It shows Old Testament kings and queens. These statues are a lot thinner and taller. In fact, the entire building's facade is stretched out. They squished it and stretched it in comparison to the other design styles that we've looked at. Trying to once again give the appearance of height. They want it to appear to be as tall as Amiens. It's not. It's just trying to trick your eye. Of course, it does have a rose window as well. And of course, lancet windows right next to it. This facade itself is quite interesting. It's fake. You can kind of see, through these windows here. So the church behind it is a traditional basilica. The only thing that they did was make a facade. They updated it. Like how people remodel their homes. They just do portions of it. And update it enough to resell it. No. Some of the sculptures on Reims are also quite interesting. I chose them because it shows you what I mentioned yesterday, that different workshops are working on different portions. You can tell that there are two different workshops working on each of these groups, as they're quite a bit different. Here's Mary, here's Mary, and these are very different looking Marys. So we have the Annunciation over here and the Visitation over here. Visitation is when Mary visits her cousin, whose name I can't remember. Oops. Oh well. John the Baptist's mom, I can't remember her name, but you know who I'm talking about. So they're visiting over here. And then of course the angel over here. What do you guys think of these when comparing them? Easy question. Which one do you like more?
I like the left.
What's the open statement there, right? The left kind of reminds me of the art statement when like the high class.
Yeah. That's how your book describes it. Your book describes the left side as more Byzantine reflective, as there is patterning in the folds, and the angel is a bit stretched out and thin, and she's very stiff and rigid. And this one, of course, there's a lot of folds in this, but it's trying to look like real cloth. As for which one I like more, I don't know. I really don't like the way the cloth looks on this. It looks harsh to me. I like their faces.
Yeah.
Their faces are very detailed.
That was the one thing that I was like.
Yeah, I like the faces.
And the face and how it's not so stiff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they are using contrapposto. They are using it correctly too.
I like the folds more.
Yeah. I kind of like how linear he looks. He looks, well, that's the thing, is he looks like a mythological creature. He doesn't look like a human. I mean, he's an angel, so I get it. I get what the artist was going for. But yeah, I do like the faces on the other one better. Yeah, interesting. And that's why I chose this one, is just to show that, yes, this is the exact same Western facade of a cathedral. It was done between 1230 and 1255, but clearly not the same artists were working on all of the statuary. Clearly. And that does take us into Sainte-Chapelle. This is done in the Rayonnette style, also known, well, it translates to radiant. I love this thing. Thing's cool. It's almost entirely glass. This thing's cool. So we're watching a video of this one. This is a private chapel that was attached to Louis IX's palace. He bought reliquary items and he wanted a chapel built to house them. So it's kind of like a museum / private chapel. The Rayonnette style is known for incorporating a lot of, well, windows, hence radiant. Yeah. This is our next form of French Gothic. It evolves into the radiant style. Obviously, extremely expensive to pull off. Really. You see? Do you see? It is a mystical space, is what he's about to say. Yeah, it's a cool one. I appreciate that one. Slide, please. And that takes us into the flamboyant style, which is the last of French Gothic styles that we're going to talk about. This is part of the late Gothic period, as is the Renaissance style that we just looked at. Flamboyant style is named after flame-like protrusions that appear on the architecture. We've already kind of seen some of it. This is the west facade of Saint Maclou, which has 5 portal entrances. In fact, even though it has 5, two of them don't actually open. The doors there, they don't open. The only actual doors are the 3 main ones that usually open for Gothic churches. But expanding the facades, making them more ornate, and of course adding tracery elements to the portals themselves rather than having them attached to the front of the cathedral. This is a tracery pointed arch here. And you can see through that tracery into the rose window and lancet windows behind. And of course, on every single bit of this, including even the flying buttresses, there are flame-like protrusions on the architectural elements. The flamboyant style, even though it does have all of these ornate tracery elements and protrusions, it does become a bit structurally confusing to follow with lines. There's a lot going on, but I like it still. And it kind of adds to the idea of it being light and airy. I feel like that's just my opinion. Adding all of the thin tracery elements to it. We are going to talk about some non-religious Gothic buildings that popped up in France now. The Hall of the Cloth Guild. This was a cloth guild. This is in Belgium, which was once part of France. Now it's not. But you can see here the Gothic elements that carried over beyond just churches and are incorporated in later buildings. This top bit with the clock tower was added afterwards by Gothic, well, people that are familiar with Gothic architecture. But the bell tower down here and the building itself are original. Like I said, this is just to show you that Gothic was not just applicable to churches. Not only is it adopted by guilds, though, it's also adopted by people in their homes. This is the home of Jacques Courier. This is a plan of it. We'll look at the actual thing in a second. Courier, though, has a pretty interesting story. He was a financier, a banker. And he had banks in every single major city in the region. He had very close ties to the Pope and was even the treasurer to the king. However, Courier ended up getting into trouble. He was arrested as people who owed him money said that he was doing illegal things with the money. He was not. They just didn't want to pay what they owed him. But when he was arrested, he was thrown in jail. He was actually going to be killed. So of course all of his land was seized, his finances froze and taken. The Pope helped sneak him out of prison though. And yeah, like I said, he was good friends with the Pope. And he ends up working closely with the Pope afterwards, and he dies on one of the crusades. Yeah, he was leading one of the crusades for the Pope and he ends up dying. Here is the house, though. It's a pretty cool house that's all done in Gothic architectural motifs with the pointed arch, the oculus and lancet windows here, the trefoils. You can see it all referenced in it, but the more interesting thing is the layout of the actual house. On the bottom floor were all of the service areas, so the kitchen, the place where the servants stayed. On the second level and upper level were all of the living areas and bedrooms and offices that they actually worked from. But above the actual doorway into the house, there was a second floor, like above the arch of the door, which housed a private chapel with stained glass windows. So it pulls from traditional decoration as well as a little bit from flamboyant style. A little. Now, they didn't just do that in France. They also had their own illuminations and luxury arts. Here is God being shown as the creator. I chose this one because it really shows off how much these people cared about math and shapes and how shapes worked and interacted between each other. Gothic art relies very heavily on geometry. These people did know how to do geometry, yes. And this particular illuminated page illustrates Christ creating the universe, and he's using a compass, a math tool. Everyone's like, what? A compass? What? You know, compass helps you draw perfect circles. Yeah. Also used to have a real needle on the end, and we would stab each other with them. Yeah, they don't. They do some, yeah. I'm going to actually skip this one and go on to this one because this one's more interesting. And go on to the interesting ones. This is a reliquary statue, which is silver, gilt, and enamel. It is 2 feet tall. And it depicts the Virgin Mary, but the Virgin Mary shown as loving and devoted mother to Christ. So this is a great example of how the Virgin shifts from being a glorified chair to a mom. She did once hold a scepter with a fleur-de-lis at the top and wear a crown. So not only is it Mary as mother, but it's Mary as Queen of Heaven, which is another name for her, kind of another title. Like I mentioned, it is a reliquary statue. It houses the Virgin's hair right inside of this fleur-de-lis, well, supposedly her hair. She is standing on top of a pedestal which has enamel scenes decorated of the Passion. And this is located in Saint Denis, which is the very first church that we looked at today. And I chose it because it was always the one that I wanted my professor to talk about in art history, and she never did. And I always thought it was interesting that, and the way they did this fleur-de-lis, it's see-through, so you can see the little teeny tiny hair inside of it. So I think it's an interesting one. And of course, you see the contrapposto-esque curve, the natural-looking flows of the garment. Very stylistically defined face, muscular setups. I forget the words. I've lost words today. I'm done. And then we're going to end here with my favorite piece, and then we'll pick up on Monday with English and Holy Roman Empire, which is short. There's only like 5. I don't even think there's 5. I think there might be 3. Yeah, there's 3. With the Castle of Love. Castle of Love is an ivory jewelry box. It's very small. This is the lid of it. But this just shows you that not everything is based around religion. Many wealthy families would commission artists and artisans to make things for their home. It's just that we don't have many of these objects left, as they weren't as highly revered or protected as like relics. Relics would be protected by the churches. This was used in a house. There's a big difference there. So because of that, we don't have too many of these non-religious items left. But I mentioned earlier that vernacular literature of courtly romances was quite popular in this time. And this is an example of that translating over into the visual arts. Castle of Love depicts a scene in which men are really fighting for the attention of women. So here we have men, they are shooting arrows at the Castle of Love, but not just any arrows, arrows of roses. They are roses. They are shooting roses out of their bows. And up top, the women at the top are defending themselves by throwing rose petals down on the men. Cupid is helping along by shooting love arrows at the men. a fun scene. It's just a fun one. In the center panel here, you have two men jousting, trying to win the hearts of the women above. And of course, over on the other side, some more of that mumbo jumbo going on. It's cute. It's very different from the religious art that we've been looking at too. Wait, there's more. The entire thing was carved, all of the sides, except for the bottom's flat. This is the one that I mentioned did unicorns yesterday. So it depicts the scene of a unicorn. Supposedly, if a unicorn approaches a woman, it shows that she is a pure maiden, which suits the Castle of Love theme from the other side. Unfortunately, this scene is quite gruesome as the unicorn is being stabbed in the heart. But it was one of these maidens in the background, well, this one in particular, that attracted the unicorn in the first place, because she is pure. Yeah, it's quite an interesting thing. That's another one that my professor never talked about, and I always thought was really interesting. Like I mentioned, on Monday, we're going to pick up with English Gothic, and yeah, there's really not too much, and Holy Roman, which is it. We'll go into the last bit, which is, yeah, this. So on Monday, we got quite a bit to do, but it's not super long of a section. This section's short. It's just early Renaissance. A reminder that you guys have your philosophy of art paper to work on.